Oh hey Elasmites, welcome back to the podcast where we swim out to sea in search of buried treasure. And that buried treasure is me, your host, Sam McNeely. No, not really. I'm more like the first mate that points out the buried treasure, which is actually this week's guest for the final round of this terrific two-part episode. Thanks for joining in on the fun, but be sure to go back and listen to part 1 from last week to be all caught up for the encore episode this week. But first, let's gossip. Thanks to all of you returning listeners, and welcome aboard, new Elasmites. This is a fantastic episode, but we've got other great ones out there, so be sure to check those out as well. And thank you to all you Elasmite Patreon donors. Your donations literally make this possible for me to be creating this content for you and bringing these fantastic speakers to you straight into your ears. And if you'd like to give, you can find our Patreon page at patreon.com/elasmospod. I'm working on some fun extra content and ways to interact with me in this podcast, so make sure to give so you can be a part of all of that fun. Thanks so much for your support. It really means the world to me. And again, that's patreon.com/elasmospod. And please rate and review this podcast on whatever platform you're listening to it on, and then send your rating and review to me at elasmospod@gmail.com so that you can be entered into a drawing to win a fun prize. You can share this podcast on social media, tagging Elasmospod to get 2 extra entries into the drawing. So that's rate, review, share on social media, and email me at elasmospod@gmail.com. And you can find the Elasmos Podcast on Instagram and Twitter at elasmospod. You can find our Facebook page, the Elasmos Podcast, A Shark's Universe, on Facebook. And you can find our website online at elasmospod.com. And remember to send in your diving, snorkeling, adventure stories for our listeners episode. You can email those to me, again, at elasmospod@gmail.com, so that your story can be told and we can help encourage ecotourism and nature exploration. We love it. Okay, now on to this week's guest. And you probably already know him. He doesn't need much of an introduction if you listened in last week, but he's got the coolest hobby I know. He's a shark photographer. And to be clear, that's a great white shark photographer. You might know him on Instagram as I Photograph Sharks, as he's got hundreds of thousands of followers from his fantastic and jaw-dropping photographs. In this second part, we covered a lot from deep blue and other famous great white sharks to his passion for education, shark movies, and life advice we all need to hear. I know I appreciated it, so I'm sure you will too. So get ready, Elasmites, for this amazing episode with shark photographer and speaker, George Probst. This is episode 6, part 2.
I think it's important to be able to show the sharks in a more representative way of how they're actually behaving versus, a lot of people tend to focus on sharks going after bait and getting those open jaw shots, which are cool. I get that they're dramatic, and I can tell you they definitely get a lot of interest on social media because that's what people expect to see, I guess, from sharks is them biting stuff, but they're not swimming around biting stuff like all the time. That's such a small percentage of their behavior that that's what I was interested in when I first started taking photographs out there, because again, that's what people expect, and that's what you were taught, that this is how a shark behaves. And by about 2010, I was just like, we're not really telling the whole story of sharks if we're just focusing on this type of photography. So I try and stay away from that.
That's really interesting. That kind of leads into what I've been wanting to ask, is how you are able to use your photography to inform the public and teach the public about shark behavior and sharks in general.
So probably the biggest way that I do that, and I just want to preface this with me saying I'm doing this for fun and because I enjoy it and because I want people to learn more about sharks and to have a more realistic and representative view of them. there are so many other people that are doing so much more for the well-being of sharks than I am. I don't want to try and put myself out there as like the savior of sharks, because there are people who work really hard, in policy and that type of stuff, and research, and put tons of hours in that don't get the probably recognition that they need, because that's not something that's popular on social media or that type of, photographs people can take in and appreciate very easily, versus somebody toiling hours and hours on, policy to help prevent sharks from getting decimated.
But even though there's really big change within policy and research, there's also a need to educate the public within other sectors. So like through art, like we've talked about in episode 1, is a really good way to educate a different group of people in a way that might be more understandable, or people might have a stronger connection to art, rather than through a 400-page manuscript of how we're going to deal with this shark crisis that we're in, So it's all about perspective, and everyone plays a role, so you kind of just have to find your niche and just work with that. All right, now back to George and how he uses his photography to help educate people.
Anyway, back to where I was going with that, probably the most rewarding thing that I do with my photography is I go to public schools. I mean, I would go to a private school too, but I try to go to public schools and interact with children, do presentations about sharks, talk to them about some of the myths that they see on television and in the movies, and use my photography, as a backdrop for that, to kind of educate them and hopefully break some of the stereotypes about sharks, so that, the next generation is not coming up the way I was, believing what I saw in Jaws at the most basic level. One of the awesome things about that is that when you go and talk to kids, they're going to have tons of questions. And some of those questions are things that, as an adult, you would just never think of. And sometimes they'll ask me questions that, man, I got no idea, but I know some researchers that I can ask about and see if, they might have an answer for you, and I can send your teacher an email and get back to you. A great example of that is, I think 2 years ago, a kid asked, "Hey, can sharks get sunburned?" And I was like, no idea. I had never thought about that, but let me find out. And it turns out that, there have been studies on the effects of the sun on sharks, on hammerheads in particular, and they can tan.
Does anybody know who this researcher is? Elasmites that listen to episode 4 are probably experts on this.
The one researcher that had worked on that I was going back and forth with said it's pretty unlikely that they would get a sunburn, because you'd have to stay at the surface and, take in enough sun to get burned, but they can definitely get a tan. So I was able to get back to that teacher and say, hey, the sharks can get a suntan, and here's a link to the study on it. So, that was something I learned because a child had a question that I wouldn't have even thought of.
Right.
And, that's just one example. I get some, some questions are funny, but every once in a while there'll be one that's like, man, I never thought about that, and let me find out. Let me see what I can find out from researchers. And sometimes researchers are like, we don't know, but other times it's something new that I learned that I would not have had that child not asked a question.
I love that. It's that childlike curiosity that really gets us to learn, It's kind of like, as we grow up, it seems like we kind of lose that sense of, freedom to ask stupid or silly questions, but that's when you, learn the most. So that's cool that you get to go to schools to teach kids, but it turns out you're also learning a lot in the end.
Yeah, I'm learning as well. Yeah, it's great. The students are the teachers sometimes, and it's...
Oh, absolutely.
I'm always excited to learn new stuff, and that's one of the great things about sharks, and white sharks in particular. There's so much that we don't know, and... Which
is crazy.
That means there's room to learn a whole lot more.
Yeah, definitely. It's really encouraging for the next generation, And how do you think your talks and your educational, presentations are able to try to change that perspective of the kill at all costs mentality against sharks?
I hope that they do. I feel like there are a lot of people that, not a lot of people, but I feel like there's going to be a certain set of people you're not going to change their mind no matter what. But I have had people contact me, via email or comments on social media that are like, I never would have thought of sharks as beautiful, and now I do because of your photography.
Wow,
and,
that's powerful.
That's seems crazy to me because, again, half the time I don't know what I'm doing, and it's just trying to capture a moment and put it out there and again,
really
share my experience. But I've had that happen, something of that nature a few times, and when it does, it really hits home.
I bet.
And, because it can get frustrating sometimes.
Yeah.
You put your, I mentioned this before, I'll put one of my favorite photos out there, and nobody responds to it at all. I'm like, this is the coolest shark in the world. How come you're not, how do you not like this? But, when you see something like that, it's like, man, even if it's just one person, it was all worth it.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, to be able to change one mind, that's an accomplishment.
But, another thing is, with the photo identification project at Guadalupe and given the sharks names and being able to refer to these sharks as individuals and talk about some of their individual characteristics, I think that helps to break that kind of mindless eating machine stereotype, because it's like, well,
oh, I agree.
This shark's more curious about coming in and checking out cameras, whereas this shark is shy and doesn't want to be around divers. And this shark only comes in really quickly and gets right back out because it's maybe not real certain that being around humans is a great idea, but it's curious enough that it'll come in real quick and then leave. And, I think when you've got sharks that people can identify by, like Lucy with her tail, or Calvert fin shredder who's got the torn up dorsal fin, and people get like a favorite shark and then want to know how that shark's doing. I'll get back from Guadalupe and it's like, did you see Lucy? Did you see?
Oh, that's cool.
People always ask me if I see Deep Blue, whom I've never seen.
So I was wondering if we were ever going to get to talk about Deep Blue, because Deep Blue is one of the most famous great white sharks in the world. She's an estimated 20-foot-long female great white shark that weighs over 4,400 pounds. That's like 2 of my Honda Accords put together, and she's still probably bigger. And Deep Blue was first discovered off of Guadalupe, but has also been seen in Hawaii and around the Pacific. But she's so famous, she has her own Wikipedia page. Someday this podcast will get there.
She's only been documented at Guadalupe twice, I think. Once was in 99 and once was in 2013, but people ask after every trip. But, people ask about bite face. And so I think when you're able to kind of connect with people on that level where they're thinking about a shark as an individual versus, again, just the stereotype, and they can put a name with it and put certain behaviors or certain physical characteristics with the shark. I think that helps to sort of break that one size fits all stereotype of them.
Yeah.
Yeah, and and again, I don't want to anthropomorphize animals because, again, they're wild animals. They're not operating the way we are. We're not operating the way they are.
Right.
But they are unique individuals. There's a lot more to them than just swimming and eating. It always goes back to that monologue that Quint does in Jaws where he talks about sharks having black eyes, lifeless eyes, like a doll's eyes. And when you get in the water with a white shark and they've got that blue ring around their eye, that's their iris is actually brown, but they've got a layer of cartilage on top of it, so it gives it a blue ring look.
I didn't know
and you
that.
can see where they're looking. And when those sharks swim by close, you can see that eye rotating to maintain eye contact with you. And it's like, okay, well, there's a lot going on behind that eye. The wheels are turning because they're maintaining eye contact with you as they pass by. And, that's another thing that I think hit me really quickly at Guadalupe when I saw, like, oh man, they're actually keeping their eye on us as they pass by. It's
Oh,
probably like,
cool.
I'm not sure if I trust those people, which might be wise on their part.
Yeah, really. I mean, I feel like I've normally thought of their eyes or heard of their eyes as being basically like black holes, you know? There's nothing there. It's that horror, like,
Yeah.
It's a doll.
Yeah, I think that's I've got a couple of decent shots that really highlight that eye structure, and you can see the blue ring really well. And their pupils are a horizontal slit, and again, that's just another thing where it's like, hey, you think sharks are mindless, lifeless, have lifeless doll eyes? Here's what a white shark's eyes really look like when you're in good light and up close. So being able to have that photography and having a few videos where you can show, if you can go into a classroom and say, hey, this is a shot where I was not in a cage. This is a shark swimming by, and you can see this shark's not coming after me. She's not interested in me at all. She's just kind of not really even paying attention, but definitely aware that I'm there, because again, you can see the shark looking at you as they swim by.
Mm-hmm.
But I think people being able to see that, again, being able to see it in a video or a photo is not the same as being there, but it's as close to the next best thing as you can get. So I really like being able to get to schools where the teacher tells me something to the effect of, these kids have never been to an ocean, or these are kids that are probably never going to see a shark.
Wow.
Would you be interested in coming to talk to them? And it's funny how sometimes when I'm approached to come to a school, people will ask me, like, very hesitantly, would you be interested in doing something? I'm like, man, I love it. Like, just let me find a time when I can get out there, because it's one of the most rewarding things that I do. I mean, I think I enjoy it as much as some of the students do.
Oh, for sure. I mean, I know I would have loved it. Probably a little more than the average student, but I mean, that's just who I am. But that's so cool. I would have loved to have had something like that, to have someone come speak to me about this world that I'm not even aware of, really. And it's gotta be amazing for those kids that haven't seen that before, or that might not even, like you said, get the chance to see them.
Yeah, it's dependent on the age range too. Like 5th and 6th grade seem to have about the best response that I've seen so far. But like, you can put just a single photo of a white shark up and start talking about it, and 10 hands pop up because they've got questions. And it's just like,
yeah, I bet.
I always try and have a presentation set up that's very structured, but I know they're going to go off the rails as soon as that first picture goes up. So with the younger kids, it's kind of just a free for all, versus once you get to older audiences, you can say, let's hold questions till the end, and it doesn't work with younger kids, but that's fine. I mean, I enjoy that level of energy as well. So
I would bet having little kids asking a ton of questions and being so excited it's almost like having your own hype man, You get so much energy behind you, and they're so interested in what you're doing.
Yeah, it's really fantastic, and again, one of the most rewarding aspects of shark photography for me is to be able to take that out to children and share and learn from them, and hopefully they learn from me.
Yeah, and I feel like you've got a really unique experience. Like, your experience is photographing white sharks, which in the shark community alone is a rare experience or even skill to have, much less the general public, like everyone in the world.
Yeah, I mean, when you think about it, the average person's not ever going to see a white shark. Mm-hmm. But the flip side of that is just about everybody, at least from my generation, who goes to the beach is thinking about sharks at some point, because it's like they grew up on Jaws. It's like,
yeah, really.
I don't feel like you can go to the beach and spend a day there without hearing a shark reference of some kind, because somebody's going to bring it up.
I think George is calling me out here. because every time at the beach, I bring up sharks. Without fail. Ask anyone in my family.
The funny thing is, we've been swimming with sharks this whole time, and now that drones are a lot more prevalent, there's so much footage of just sharks swimming around with people at the beach that people don't even know they were there, and like, hey, this is how it's always been. You were swimming with sharks and you just didn't notice it.
Yeah, which is just so crazy. And like 99.9% of the time, they're just not interested in us boring old humans.
Which is good for us, because if they really did start targeting us, I would never set foot in an ocean again.
Yeah, I don't think I would either, And yeah, so how did you overcome your fear of sharks? Or have you overcome your fear of sharks?
Yeah, like that first, within 15 minutes of being in the water at Guadalupe, it was like, it was gone. It was just like everything you thought was nonsense.
Wow.
And, there are times where it's kind of fun to like think back and be like, man, isn't it ridiculous that you were... I mean, I can remember when I was a little kid, like being afraid a shark was going to get me in the pool, and it's just, obviously that's kid mentality, but
yeah.
I think the first time I saw Jaws, I was 7.
Oh my God.
Which might be a little bit too young for Jaws in hindsight, but I still love watching that movie to this day.
Me too.
I watch it now and it's like, yeah, the way the shark's portrayed is ridiculous, but I still enjoy the movie.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I mean, I've talked with a lot of guests about Jaws and how it works twofold, It's inspired so many shark enthusiasts to be who they are, in the world of shark research and education and all that. But it's also created such a culture that's against sharks, that's anti-shark.
Yeah. And it's a catch-22 because there are a lot of researchers that when you ask them, about Jaws, they're like, that was Hooper's why I got into marine biology, or was my first introduction to that.
Mm-hmm.
But, I've seen people get really upset on social media if you even mention that you like Jaws or you watch Jaws. And I'm like, it's kind of like the equivalent of people watching Jaws and thinking that's how sharks are in real life would be like if I watched Friday the 13th and thought all people walk around with a hockey mask and, or slashing people up. I'm like, it's
a movie. You've got to take it with a grain of salt, It's for entertainment.
Yeah. I mean, Jaws definitely had a role in shaping people's stereotypes of sharks, but I feel like that's on the people, not on the movie itself. Like, you should be able to separate fact from fiction. And again, like, I feel like part of the problem was when Jaws came out, there weren't a lot of shark documentaries out there. There wasn't a lot of information about sharks, so it's like, this is how you're going to be exposed to sharks. It's just a movie about a serial killer shark.
And that's tough, too. I mean, when that's your only exposure...
Right.
It just makes it hard to see them not in that way.
But I feel like nowadays, there's a lot of great documentary footage out there and shows, and there are some not great ones too.
Yeah, but there are some good ones that can hopefully
definitely
surpass the bad ones, I mean, I guess Sharknado might not be the most, how do I put this delicately, accurate.
Yeah, I'd like to hope that nobody's worried about an actual Sharknado happening, at least.
Yeah, I know, me too. So do you have a favorite white shark or just any shark in general that you've photographed before?
Yeah, my favorite individual shark is Cal Ripfin, or Shredder. He's in the book as Shredder. When I first went to Guadalupe, he was there, and he was there on every trip I took to Guadalupe through 2011.
No way.
When he would show up, like, your camera was getting a workout. Like, it was guaranteed you were going to have a good day of photographs, because he's just super curious. Like, he's the shark that, when he showed up, you just hear people on the boat, like, cheering. And I feel like if not for that shark, my first Guadalupe experience would have been significantly different, and I might not have been as enthusiastic about going back without that individual.
Wow.
So I owe quite a bit to that shark. He doesn't know it because he's a shark. He doesn't care. Unfortunately, after the 2011 season, and he was documented, so when they started the photo identification project and documenting the sharks of Guadalupe in 2001, he was documented every year from 2001 to 2011. And then he just disappeared after 2011 and hasn't been seen since. So
oh, man.
Don't know what happened to him. I like to tell myself that he's out there living his best life somewhere, but the male sharks at Guadalupe are pretty consistent about coming back every year. Females, when they reach maturity, will go every other year fairly often, and that's the thought there is that they're going to give birth in the Sea of Cortez or on the Pacific coast of Baja in their off years. But the males, there's a shark named Biteface. I think I mentioned him before. He was one of the first sharks documented out there and has been documented there every year.
Wow.
Other than last year, because nobody was able to get out to the island, it was shut down, so we don't know if he was there last year, but every year that people have been there, he's been documented there.
Are you planning on going back this year?
I have plans to, so if the world continues to move in the right direction and everything continues to improve at the rate that it is, hopefully we'll be getting back out there in August.
Oh, is that like the season, I guess, to see the great whites?
Yeah, the season's pretty much from August through November. That doesn't mean that there's no sharks there before August and none there after November, but that's like peak season. I know some boats start going out in late July, but the earliest I've ever gone out is August. And the way those migrations typically work is that the males tend to arrive first, so in August and September is more male dominant. You'll see a lot more of the smaller sharks and the male sharks there. And then the bigger sharks start to roll in late September or October. So by late October or early November is when you've got the bigger sharks kind of running the show there. September is an interesting time because you can get a good mix. And again, that's not set in stone. You can still see a female shark show up in August. They're not checking their calendars, but just as a general rule, you're going to see more males in August, September, and then in October, November, you're going to see more bigger sharks and more females.
So I've run into this before, and I've always wondered why female sharks are typically bigger than male sharks. So, as we do now, a simple Google search told me they're just bigger because they need more girth to give birth. And so many of these larger fish have live births and multiple pups born in each litter. As you can imagine, there's a lot of weight and space they need in addition to their already large body mass. So that's that on that.
Yeah, so I like to try and get out there throughout the different months so you can kind of see some different sharks and get... So, August it can be a different experience than October or November. I like seeing small sharks just as much as I like seeing big sharks. In fact, the smaller sharks are oftentimes a little bit more interesting to watch than the bigger ones because, once a shark gets to a certain size, it's not worried about anything. It's not worried about us being there. It's not worried about the other sharks. It's just kind of...
It's done.
Cruising through where you'll get some of these younger sharks that get in, and this is when we will end up seeing kind of some of the agonistic behaviors between the sharks where they might be encroaching on another shark's personal space, and, you'll see these particular behaviors like mouth gaping, parallel swimming they'll do sometimes to size up the other shark, and it's like, okay, well, you're the smaller shark, you got to get out of here.
Interesting.
Tail slapping at the surface is another thing that they'll do.
Huh, I didn't know that one.
One of the agonistic behaviors that people tend to really focus in on, and I get this a lot with some of my photos, which it doesn't make sense to me because a photo is just an instant shot of the shark, but the downward pectoral fin positioning is when it's done deliberately and held like that, and the shark will kind of arch its back and zigzag. That's a pretty well-known agonistic behavior.
Oh, really?
What people tend to not think about is that sharks use their fins to navigate. So they're going to put their fins down to make turns. And, I'll take a picture of a shark turning and people are like, oh, you were in trouble. That shark was mad. And I was like, this is like a single frame from when a shark was turning and its fins went right back to a neutral position after it made the turn.
Yeah, the shark's got to turn around somehow.
Yeah. The primary use of the pectoral fins is not for agonistic behaviors. It's for navigation purposes.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I had no idea they could use their pectoral fins to show an agonistic behavior.
I have not seen that at Guadalupe. I've seen tail slapping. I've seen parallel swimming. I've not personally witnessed that kind of deliberate. And again, it's a very deliberate behavior when they do that. The mouth gaping is another thing that's like very deliberate on a few occasions. But I haven't seen the downward pectoral fins, at least not that I picked up on. And I've seen it in videos before, but not anything that I've ever witnessed firsthand.
Maybe that's a good thing. Maybe they're thinking, oh, look, this is our friend over here, George. Our old buddy's back.
I've seen enough mouth gaping and other measuring games that I don't think they're always getting along. And I've seen enough sharks with bites from other white sharks to... That's kind of the last draw. It's like, okay, you didn't pick up on the social cues. I gave you the agonistic behavior, and now you're going to get a bite. And I've seen that happen as well.
Wow, really?
Yeah, and it's not like a I'm trying to eat you or kill you bite. It's you didn't pick up on the social cues. This is your last warning. Quick bite and release. Mm-hmm. The time that I saw it, the message was received very clearly because the other shark was like, all right, I'm out of here.
Like, okay, I get it.
I always joke about Bite Face because his name is because he had a huge bite on his face when he was ID'd, but he comes back, and that bite healed up within a year, but he comes back and he's got new bites almost every year.
Oh my gosh.
And just like, man, he's not good on social cues, obviously.
He might just not pick up on it well. He's not the most socially aware, but that's okay. We still love him.
There's always one like that, isn't there?
Yeah, but at least he picks up on it eventually, I mean, he's still there, so he's got to pick up on it eventually.
Yeah.
All right, and now one of my tougher questions that I've put a lot of thought into and still don't quite have good answers for, so I just want to hear yours to maybe help me. But so one of my biggest struggles is seeing where we're at and where we're going. You look around and it's just chaos. It's hellfire. It's the world's coming to an end in every which way. What is a bright spot for you? What about the future excites you and keeps you motivated and helps you remain positive? It's a hard question.
Yeah. Now's a bad time to ask that question.
Yeah, timing might not be the best.
Again, I think, again, that being able to go and talk to kids about sharks is one of the things I look forward to, and it gives me some inspiration because I can see the shift in kind of perception with the younger generation because they're definitely many steps ahead of where I was at that age. And, you'll go in and start to talk about stuff and kids will already be one step ahead of you knowing stuff about sharks. Here's a good example of that. I went into a class of 5th graders 2 or 3 years ago, and we were waiting for another class because sometimes I'll go to schools and multiple classes will pile into a room so that they can all get the shark experience. And this teacher was like, does anybody have any questions for him before the other class gets here? And this kid raised his hand and he was like, are we going to talk about obligate ram ventilation? And I mean, this is like a 5th grader. I'm like, I didn't know what an obligate ram ventilator was when I was in 5th grade. And I said, actually, we are. I said, I've got a slide about it. And, I'm going to talk about buccal pumping and ram ventilation. So,
that's amazing.
It's when you see kids with that level of enthusiasm and knowledge, it's kind of hope inspiring, I think, that there might be hope for us yet.
No, I am not. Because I just had to look up obligate ram ventilation, which I did not know what it was. So obligate ram ventilation is when fish or sharks have to keep moving to have water go across their gills, and so they essentially can breathe. And so they either do this by swimming at a certain speed to get water across their gills, to get the oxygen to their blood, or they find a current to just kind of hang out in and use the current to pass the water across their gills. And so the great white shark is one of about 24 or so of these kind of sharks, which is pretty small because there are over maybe 500 species of sharks. So I thought it'd be a lot more that rely on needing to swim to stay alive. But while I was also looking up this, I went down a rabbit hole and found the opposite, where sharks that can breathe while stationary are called buccal pumpers, meaning they don't need to swim constantly to stay alive. And so sometimes in aquariums they can be found just sitting or resting on the sea floor. And they can draw water in through either their mouths or through an opening behind their eyes, which is called a spiracle. And a good example of spiracles are on stingrays and skates. They have these little kind of almost horn-like things that are behind their eyes. And that's one way that they can breathe while just sitting on the sea floor, because their mouths are on the bottom. They're underneath them. And so if they're sitting on the floor, they can't pass water because they just eat a bunch of sand. And so they have to use their spiracles, which are on top and exposed to the water, to draw in water through there to pass through their gills. So now you can say you're smarter than a 5th grader. I probably still can't, though.
I mean, you sent me these questions before we started talking, but when I got to the ones about the future, I'm just like, oh, that's going to be problematic, because I'm a very one day at a time type guy, because it's like, I have a concept that there's a future and that's going to get here eventually, maybe, but like, maybe it won't, I don't know if I'm going to make it to tomorrow. So I'm not a very future focused type person, which is probably frustrating for some of the people in my life.
But there are multiple ways to look at life, So you take it one step at a time, but that has its own benefits. Like, you can really make the most of every day and capitalize on what you're given that day. Yeah.
I mean, today's the day, and if tomorrow gets here, I'll deal with it when it does. I don't have a throw caution to the wind, like, this is my last day on Earth, I'm just going to do whatever. But at the same time, it's like, man, don't put off till tomorrow what you might want to do before you check out.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's great advice. I mean, that's why I'm starting this podcast, is because I eventually want to get into conservation, but that's a job, essentially, and so I can't really do that right now when I don't necessarily have the qualifications or am not in that position. So I just want to do what I can right now, which is do something for free and creative, which is a podcast. And so since we're on the topic that you love so much, the future, do you have any future goals in the world, I guess in general, or in the world of marine science or photography?
I really don't. I just want to continue to do what I do. I'd like to be able to get to some more lower income schools, and I need to figure out how to reach out to those types of schools. Being currently based in Southwest Virginia, there's a lot of rural schools that are, pretty low income. That, again, that's, when I get teachers that are like, these kids have never been to the beach before.
Right.
It'd be great to come see them. I'd like to do, get into some inner city schools if possible. Having grown up in the DC area, I've done some schools up there where, one of them was a teacher that was like, yeah, these kids have never been to the beach, most of them. And so I'd like to be able to do that and, just kind of expand that. Of course, again, I'm doing all this on my own dime, so I have to be realistic about that. It's like I can't take weeks off of work at a time and go do these and,
That's amazing.
Spend the money to travel. I mean, I spent $850 one time to go talk to sharks, talk about sharks to people, and it's like, that's not sustainable. But around here, I can do it at almost no cost other than, take a couple hours off of work and drive to a school.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm trying to figure out ways to kind of, hey, if I'm traveling to Pennsylvania, are there any opportunities that, are going to match up with my schedule while I'm there where I can get a Shark Talk in or, talk to a school, or if I'm going to New York, or if I'm going to be traveling, West Coast. So, being able to figure out the logistics of that a little bit better and organizationally, if I can, I guess if I have any goals, that's kind of my goal, is to expand that out a little bit more and try and figure out ways that I can get to more people and share my photography and my limited knowledge.
Has it been easier or harder for you to do these in-class educational programs this past few years with COVID and everything? Like with the almost universal access to Zoom?
I've been doing some Zoom, and I don't like it as much as being in,
Yeah. I get that.
I mean, it's obviously easier you don't have to travel,
Mm-hmm.
but it's not as rewarding to me. And sometimes I did one for my brother's friends. My brother has a group of friends that, were interested, and he's talked to them about some of our trips, and he's like, yeah, my brother does, shark presentations, and he's like, hey, would you be willing to do one for my friends? And I ended up doing that and not knowing he had everybody on mute.
Oh no.
And I was just like, man, these people are not enjoying this at all. Like, I'm not getting any response from anybody, because, I try and make it fun and throw in little quips and stuff while I'm presenting, and like just dead silence. And so like 15 minutes in,
awful.
This little pop-up came on the message, and it was like, can we ask a question? And I was like, yeah. And my brother was like, oh, I have to unmute him. And I was like, oh, everybody was muted. I was like, I thought I was just bombing up here,
I bet that was a relief to know they were just muted.
Yeah, it was. Some talks go better than others, but, and then afterwards, everybody was like, no, it was great. But, yeah, I think being there in person, you can read the room a whole lot better.
Mm-hmm.
If a certain style is not resonating with the audience, you can hopefully try and change it up so that things are hitting a little bit better. I don't run into that too often. Generally, things tend to go pretty well, but every once in a while. I think when I was first getting started, not really knowing what I was doing, I went and talked to the Fisheries Society at Virginia Tech, and that definitely did not go as well as most of my presentations go now, because there were people like looking at their watches. I'm like, if somebody's looking at their watch, that's not a good sign. And I used to be terrified of speaking in front of people too, and that was probably only the second or third time I had done anything like that. So I'm sure that it was horrible, but and I still get nervous, every time, because I'm pretty introverted, but I'm able to break out of that a little bit when I'm talking about sharks, because it's something that I want to share with other people.
Yeah, it's just a passion.
Yeah. It's funny because I so look forward to doing shark presentations, but every time, like even with this podcast, like this sense of nervousness just hits me like about 15 minutes before, and I'm like, oh no. But once I get going, it's pretty good.
Yeah, I'm sure you kind of hit your stride, and after you've done so many of them, I'm sure it's got to be at least a little less nerve-wracking, at least compared to the first time.
Yeah, it's definitely way better than when I first started. And one of my friends who was a school teacher locally here, she's the one who got me started. Like she was like, sometimes we have guest speakers come in. Would you be interested in coming in to talk about sharks? And I was like, I was.
Yeah.
This was before like I was not comfortable at all talking to anybody, getting in front of anybody.
Yeah, absolutely.
I feel like probably the first couple times I went to her school, she said it was great, but I'm like, I feel like it's a lot better now than it was. Yeah, but I always have to tip my hat to her because it's something I would have never even thought about because, again, I was terrified of talking in front of people. So it's been good for me in that regard, too, because sometimes you have to get up in front of people and talk, even if it's not about sharks. And so that's helped me out a lot, too. It's been a good growing experience for me on multiple levels. So I owe a lot to sharks is the moral of the story.
I think we should all have that perspective.
I try and convince people of that. I'm not always sure it resonates with them, but I keep hammering it home.
I mean, that's the goal of this podcast, so let's keep trying. And I think I know the answer to this one, but do you have a favorite animal?
I mean, I do like white sharks. I was always a big frog fan growing up when I was a kid.
Really?
And a big dinosaur fan. But I would say now, and I love dogs.
Yeah.
I would say my favorite species is dogs.
It's a good choice.
But yeah, I mean, I mentioned this before, though. I'm a big fan of all animals. White sharks are definitely my favorite shark species, though. I know there's some other people out there that like to claim that other shark species are the best sharks, but they're wrong.
Objectively, they're wrong.
Nah, I mean, I get excited to see any type of shark, but I'm definitely, white sharks are at the top of my list of sharks that I want to see. Out of the sharks that I have not seen yet, great hammerheads probably at the top of the list. Out of sharks that I can realistically see, I would love to see a goblin shark, frill shark, or a megamouth. But
oh yeah,
I'm gonna keep things realistic.
I know. I love all those weird kinds of sharks, but I would love to see a great white shark too. That's been a dream of mine since I was like 5 years old, and I was given just a shark picture book. I mean, I still have it on my desk right here, the same one, and I really, really want to see a great white eventually.
Yeah, I had I think it's an August 81 issue of National Geographic that I kept for years because it had just shots that David Dublé took of white sharks, and I was just like, man, that's so cool. Some things you just never outgrow, which is good.
Yeah, you just never lose that enthusiasm.
The great thing about seeing sharks is it doesn't get old. Like the first time, like I said, that first experience of me seeing a shark was the one breaching at Guadalupe, and it's just as exciting to see your 200th white shark as it is your first.
That's so true. Every time I go to an aquarium, I just can't help my jaw dropping to the floor every time I see those sharks swim by. And so if you could be any animal that best describes your personality, what would it be?
I'm going to say jackass, and not because of what you're thinking, but because I'm thinking of Eeyore from Winnie the Pooh. I've been told I'm a lot like him, which, he's not an actual donkey. As far as an actual animal, yeah, I feel like I can relate to white sharks pretty well.
Yeah.
Kind of stick to themselves, do their own thing, and every once in a while interact with their own kind when they have to.
Exactly, when they have to. Well, thank you so much for taking all this time to talk with me. I'm sorry it was so long, but I really appreciate it.
And again, thank you for the opportunity. Like I said, I love talking about sharks, so anybody who's willing to listen to me, I'm more than happy to do so.
So let's all give George a huge round of applause and a big thank you for coming here and speaking with me. It's been so great talking with him and learning about what he does and why he does it. And I just can't say enough good things about him. So thank you again, George. And you can find his website, SharkPix, that's PIX.com online. And his Instagram is iPhotographSharks. And his Twitter is George Probst. And that's Probst as in Probst. So be sure to go check him out on all those platforms and learn more about him and see his great photos, which are just so inspiring. So be sure to go support him and his efforts to educate the public and those that might not have the chance to see these wonderful creatures that we here at the Elasmos Podcast love and care about so much. And thank you to all you Patreon donors who are making this show possible. And if you're not a Patreon donor and you want to support, please go to our Patreon page at patreon.com/elasmospod. This really means everything to me that you can support me even just for a few dollars. It really helps make this possible and helps me keep going to bring wonderful people like George onto this podcast so that he can share his experiences and his life advice with everyone. So thank you again, and that's patreon.com/elasmospod. And please rate and review this podcast on whatever platform you're listening to it on, and make sure to send that rating and review to me at elasmospod@gmail.com so that you can be entered into a drawing to win a prize from our guests from episode 1. And you can share this podcast on social media, tagging Elasmospod for 2 extra entries into the drawing. So remember to rate, review, share on social media, and email me at elasmospod@gmail.com. You can find us on Twitter and Instagram at Elasmospod. You can find our Facebook page, The Elasmos Podcast, A Shark's Universe, on Facebook. And please email me your diving, snorkeling, adventure stories at elasmospod@gmail.com so that you can have your story told on our next listener's episode. Wouldn't that be awesome to hear your own story? Oh, I would love that so much. And you can find our website, elasmospod.com, online. And thank you to Paul McNeely for creating that. It looks so good, and I'm so excited for it. And thank you to Wes McNeely and Connor Blake for making the amazing theme song. You can find Wes on Instagram at wes.mcneely1 and on YouTube at Wes McNeely. And then you can find me on Instagram at smcneely4335. And now onto my update for this week. So my update this week is a little premature because tomorrow I'm giving blood to the American Red Cross. And I've never done it before. I'm a little nervous, but I'm also really excited because if you didn't know, like I didn't until recently, and my work told me, the American Red Cross is in a blood crisis because throughout the pandemic, there's been at least a 10% drop in the amount of blood that's being donated. If you're able, please go out and support the Red Cross and help them get all the blood they need so that people's lives can be saved and changed. And so yeah, I've always been kind of nervous about giving blood, which is why I've never done it, but I've always wanted to. I've just been so nervous, and now I'm finally trying to overcome that fear, I guess, of it. I don't know what it is because I'm okay with shots now. I used to not be. I used to cry when we drove past the hospital. That's another story. But it's for a good cause. And so even though I'm a little nervous, I'm very excited to be a part of this. And just go online and search the American Red Cross to give for yourself because that would really mean so much to them and to all those people that are in need of blood and are waiting for that new blood to come in. So hopefully giving the blood goes well, and maybe I'll get a cookie. I would like a cookie. I'll just go buy like a cake or something. And that'll be my reward for being brave. I think that's the way to go. Alright, thanks for listening, Elasmites. I'll see you back here next week for another fantastic episode of the Elasmos Podcast. Later, skaters.